Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you for being here. It's you brought some July weather with you from
it seems delightful,
Toronto.
but thank you so much, Eric, and I'm sorry the other Eric isn't here, but thank you, and thank you to the Linda Hall Library for if I lived in Kansas City, I'd be hanging out here. This seems like a fabulous place. So
you have to come back and do some research. Yes. Well, it's a wonderful book, The Science of Shakespeare. I know the library has a copy. It's checked out, though. But so if you're interested in reading it, put your name in and come back and check it out, or purchase a copy, I guess.
Yeah.
It's a wonderful book. It's very readable, accessible. You can learn a lot of history of science reading it, in addition to the Shakespeare connections. Let me start off with the question, what made you suspect that Shakespeare might be a doorway into the scientific revolution?
Yeah, so I'll just, in answering that question, I'll give a little bit of my sort of background and how that project came to be. I hope my volume levels are all right. I hope people can hear me. So I was a science nerd from the beginning. My parents very generously got me a telescope when I was 14. I learned the constellations thanks to books from the public library in Halifax, where I grew up, Halifax, Nova Scotia. And so that was always a big part of my life, stargazing from the Annapolis Valley and just, enjoying Jupiter. In fact, just last night it was a clear night, and Jupiter was very high up near the moon, and Venus visible just after sunset in the west, so maybe people have caught that. And as for Shakespeare, well, I was always sort of, I don't know how to put it, I was like an amateur fan or enthusiast, so I didn't know, I wasn't especially knowledgeable about Shakespeare as a kid, but going to the plays was a delight. Again, my parents played an important role there, taking me to see Macbeth when I don't really remember, but maybe I was 12 or 13 or something like that, which is a good age to just really kind of get into these things for the first time. And then, of course, like Romeo and Juliet, I would have encountered in school, and Julius Caesar, and so on. So, right, and then I guess the question is, so what made me think there was some science going on in the Shakespeare? Well, just because, as you go through the plays, and you don't have to be any kind of Shakespeare scholar to do this, but as you go through the plays, it's like, well, he's always talking about stuff happening in the sky. There's, the stars, or the firmament, as a word that would have been used in Shakespeare's time, comets, meteors, eclipses, many references to the sun and the moon, and some of them are kind of straightforward, like Juliet telling Romeo, don't, swear not by the inconstant moon. Like that's kind of, again, you don't have to have a PhD to figure out what's going on there. She's hoping he'll swear by something more constant. I don't know what, the sun, she doesn't specify, but not the moon, because it's kind of always changing. And then there are much more sort of obscure references that are harder to parse. But I guess the main thing is there are so many of these references that you just can't help wondering, okay, like is all of that just, for fun, just to get the action going, or is there something deeper that we could sink our teeth into?
And when we talk about the scientific revolution, especially in astronomy, what are we talking about there that was going on during Shakespeare's time?
Right. So I think I have a slide. Let me just go to the first picture here. See if this, yeah, great. So this is sort of the medieval view of the cosmos, and in a moment I'll get to what was changing. So that's the Earth in the middle. And everything in those days was thought to be made up of earth, air, fire, and water, right? The four elements which are labeled there. I don't know if folks at the back can see it, but take my word for it if you're too far away from the screen. And then around the Earth you have spheres. So of course they're just black against white here, but these were imagined to be crystalline spheres, not circles, but three-dimensional spheres. So that's a phrase that crops up in Shakespeare's works, and these spheres are thought to suspend the various celestial objects, including the planets. So one sphere per planet, as it were, and one for the sun and one for the moon. And in fact, the planets and the moon are marked with their sort of traditional zodiacal sign, you know what I mean? So the arrow for Mars and the plus thingy for Venus. that you can see. And then on the far outer perimeter, it's actually labeled crystalline firmament. So that's the sphere of the so-called fixed stars. So this is the traditional view that dates back to the ancient Greeks and probably beyond, and was very much the kind of standard way of looking at things, at least, let's say, in the middle of the 1500s. Now, an important development happens in 1543, and I'm not going to inundate you with dates, but 1543 was a big year because Copernicus publishes his book in which a different way of looking at things emerges. And I'll just, before I forget, I'll just say that it was also the year that Vesalius published what you would call the first modern anatomy textbook. So things were happening. Now, Shakespeare wasn't born yet. He would be born about 20 years later. In Copernicus's diagram on the right, you've got, I want to call it like a simpler view. I mean, of course, I'm prejudiced because I know it turned out to be the right view, and it's, this is a trap you can fall into of judging everything by modern standards. But I like Copernicus's take on this. In fact, we were just earlier looking at an original copy of De Revolutionibus, Copernicus's book, said to be, the first copies were said to be presented to him on his deathbed. That may not be exactly, maybe it was like a few days or a week before, I don't know. But people think that he looked at it, found some typos, and that's what killed him, or something like that. But at any rate, so 1543, we have this new view. And again, it's not brand new because some of the ancient Greek thinkers understood that this was probably how things were, but information didn't travel as freely, and there was certainly no publishing. But of course, in Copernicus' time, you could indeed publish a book, distribute it widely, and then, maybe we'll get into it a little bit, but some educated folks in places like England would have seen this, would have been aware of this change. And yeah, so in other words, Shakespeare lived, so he comes onto the scene in 1564, just 20 years after this momentous book is published, and I guess I would say this, sort of change is in the air. It doesn't mean like the change happened quickly or that everybody was participating in it, but new ideas were in the air.
How much of that intellectual upheaval could realistically have reached Shakespeare? What did he know and when did he know it?
Yeah. Right. So Copernicus's book is in Latin, and it's very thick, and it's full of diagrams. It's quite technical. So I doubt that Shakespeare ever saw it with his own eyes, and if he did, he might not have loved it. It might have been a bit alien to him, as it would be for a modern reader. But England's foremost astronomer at that time was a man named Thomas Digges. And in fact, the entire Digges family is sort of interesting, and I don't want to give too much away because a lot of this is in the book, but Digges was almost certainly, the senior Digges, so Leonard Digges, who was Thomas Digges's father, published an almanac in English. I guess the way we would describe it today is sort of popularizing the Copernican system. I forget exactly what year that was, but it was early on enough that Shakespeare could have encountered it in his youth quite readily. I don't know exactly how wide an audience it got, but that is something that if Shakespeare had seen it, he absolutely could have read it and had no difficulty understanding the main ideas. Shakespeare has some very interesting connections to the Digges family. So Thomas Digges had a son also named Leonard, so the son has the same name as the grandfather. It skips a generation, right? Leonard, Thomas Leonard. So Leonard, the son, if you flip through a copy or even a facsimile copy of the first folio, you will see, well, first you'll see the dedication from Ben Jonson, which I think many of you are familiar with. Basically, I don't remember the exact words, but it says, "My friend Shakespeare was a great guy. You're going to love this book." And then there's another, not in those exact words. And then it's the one where, well, anyway, yeah, it's they were competitors, but also buddies or linguistic companions. Leonard Digges has another sort of poem in dedication to to Shakespeare. And the Diggs name is kind of forgotten today. He's a nobody. We sort of remember who Ben Jonson was. And of course, everybody knows who Shakespeare was. So Leonard, the youngest Leonard, was clearly a fan of Shakespeare. And then things I get into the book, they actually lived in the same neighborhood in what's now, some of you I'm sure have been to London, so there's a neighborhood just north of St. Paul's Cathedral that was at that time the edge of the city. It's right up against the old Roman wall, and to this day you could still see parts of the ancient Roman wall in London. And at any rate, so there was some geographical proximity. And then we may get into, if Tycho Brahe happens to come up, Tycho Brahe was probably Europe's greatest astronomer at this time. And in fact, Tycho was the greatest of the pre-telescopic astronomers, period. He studied the night sky with his eyes, with instruments like quadrants and sextants, and cataloged the stars that he could see, made tables of where the planets are and all of that. And that information, it's possible that could have made its way to Shakespeare via Thomas Diggs.
Well, I want to follow up on
Yeah.
Tycho Brahe.
Sure.
And his observatory near Elsinore.
Yes.
And it's got an interesting connection to Shakespeare, a possible
It
connection.
does. Let's see. With luck, that'll be the next picture. Let's just push the button and see if that was the next one there. Oh, no. So before we get, because to keep these in order, so I will get to that presently. But I have a couple of video clips for you tonight. And this first one, which maybe I should have played a few minutes ago, but that's all right. We'll see it now. It's from Julius Caesar, and it's a good example. As some of you, I'm sure, are familiar with it. It's a good example of how, the heavens and the workings of the heavens are just incorporated into the everyday language that folks, I mean, maybe not everybody, but if you're a character in a Shakespearean play, you're just likely to start talking this way. And let's look at the clip, and then I'll say a few words about it, and then I'll get to the question. So with luck, this will just play automatically. So it's good stuff. And it's funny because this book came out a while ago, so I've seen this clip many, many, many times, and also the one that you're going to see later, but I still love it. And I was just Googling to remind myself the actor's name. I wrote it down here. Some of you folks may. Charles Gray. I don't know what else he was in, because he's a little bit before my time. But this is the BBC, starting in the late 70s and into the 80s, did the entire catalog. Like, they did every Shakespeare dramatic production. And as I was researching this book, I went online to see if I could order the DVDs, and yeah, it turns out I was able to get them through a South Korean reseller, and it was great. And I mean, I think you can get them directly from the BBC also. But the version I got, you could choose between English and Korean subtitles, and I watched them with the English subtitles, and it's great because, as you can see, it really helps you, because some of the language is not exactly the language we would use today, and some of the words are used in a little different. The other thing I didn't really set up the clip, but obviously the citizens of Rome have sort of cornered Caesar outside the Senate House to ask for him to lift the order of banishment that he had placed on the brother of one of the guys. And not to give too much away, but things don't go very well for Caesar from this point from this point onward. All right, now the question was about Tycho Brahe, right?
Tycho Brahe is observatory near Elsinore.
Right. Oh, I've got the John Donne. Well, what should we do? Shall I talk about Tycho, or should I talk about John Donne?
Let's go with John.
Okay, yeah. What I would have said here, so these slides are all sort of recycled from previous talks that I've given, and things might be in a little funny order. But Shakespeare, of course, wrote about things going on in the heavens, but he wasn't. There were other writers in Shakespeare's time who were sort of more obviously into it and really had things to say about it, right? So in Shakespeare, everything's kind of an enigma, which is actually good because it made my book possible. If you could just read it and understand everything instantly, there's less to say. So John Donne is not quite a contemporary. I mean, he's almost a contemporary. He's born 15 years later than Shakespeare, and outlives him by whatever it is, 15 years or so. And in this work, which some of you will know, I'm sure, a poem that he writes. So did the world from the first hour decay, that evening was beginning of the day, and new philosophy calls all in doubt the element of fire is quite put out. The sun is lost and the earth, and no man's wit can well direct him where to look for it. So he's clearly, discombobulated, like he's clearly distraught over these changes that are happening in the heavens and our understanding of them. And I'm not any kind of an expert on John Donne, but just that there's no exactly equivalent thing in Shakespeare, because this is very direct. And Milton, well, some of you have read Paradise Lost, and where there's just extended discussions and debates about these issues. But again, Milton also post-dates, they overlap, whatever, but Milton is born, a good bit after Shakespeare. So as the years went on, it just became more and more clear that this Copernican thing wasn't going to go away, and you'd have to grapple with it. Now, with luck, we're coming up on Tycho. Yes, here we go. All right, good. I knew it was in there. So Tycho, I think I've mentioned, Tycho Brahe was the foremost pre-telescopic astronomer. He lived in Denmark, and at that time, the king, he convinced the king to give him some money, and more importantly, an island where he could build his own observatory/palace, which is what you see in the corner there. On the left is the island. It's called Wien. You can visit there today. I did when I was researching the book. And a lot of interesting things happened there. He observed a new star in the sky. That was pretty interesting. The traditional way of looking at, thinking about the heavens was that fixed stars, they were supposed to be perfect and immutable. There wasn't supposed to be change. So when things did change, like if a meteor flashed through the sky or even a comet, that was imagined to be happening very close by. As we know now, in fact, meteors are close by, comets are not. Comets circle the sun, and they kind of messed that up. But they imagined that since comets come and go, they must be part of this, what would be the word? Well, the opposite of changeable or corrupt, a lower sphere. So that new sky burst onto the scene in 1572, kind of made Tycho a bit of a celebrity. I guess the king said, I'm glad I gave you all that money because it's going to enhance Denmark's reputation and that sort of thing. The number that I if I'm remembering this correctly, but Tycho's observatory, and he had a staff to help him, consumed something like 1% of the Danish national budget, which is like a lot. If you can get 1% of the American budget for your project, that's great. All right, let me see. I'm just trying to remember what's next on the. Yeah, okay. So the setting. This is interesting because I know we're hoping to tie this into Shakespeare. So here is a view of the channel separating Denmark and Sweden. I think at that time it was all part of the Danish Empire. It's complicated because Denmark and Sweden kept going to war against each other and whatnot. There's a little island just right of center. So that's it. That's Tycho's Island. This next slide just gets a slightly zoomed in thing. So that's Wien, labeled in. I guess Latin, unless it's, Latin. And Uraniborg, but labeled as Uraniborgum, is the palace/observatory. There's a sea battle going on. That's great. I don't really know what the battle is. And then there's a grand castle down at the bottom on the Danish side of the channel, marked as Helsinor, or as we would say it in English, Elsinore. This was the setting for Shakespeare's play Hamlet, but I should add, so Hamlet, like everything Shakespeare wrote, is based on earlier stuff that other people wrote, with a few exceptions. So there was a medieval story about, revenge and the uncle and all this stuff. So that was already extant, but it was Shakespeare who decided to place it at Elsinore. So that is unique to the version of Hamlet that we know and love that dates from about 1600. So Elsinore, and there are other things. Shall I say more about connections to, or do you, what have you got next lined up? Because if it's not Tycho, then I'll keep going for a minute.
I think one more slide.
Oh, yes, okay. Yes. So this is important. Tycho, this is an engraving that he had made of himself. By the way, it's a weird, everything about it is a bit odd. His left hand has a right thumb. Yeah, I mean, it took me, I didn't see it the first time I looked at it, but it's odd. Something you don't see, so the artist rendered him as having a normal person's nose, but he lost part of his nose in a duel when he was a young man. I don't know exactly who he was fighting or what they were fighting about, but he lost part of his nose and wore a prosthetic, which he tried to glue on with some kind of ointment, but it kept falling off, and it was difficult for him. So I don't know what you think of this picture. I think he was a bit pompous. I think he was a bit full of himself, and scattered around the outer perimeter here are the crests of various illustrious members of his extended family, just basically to him trying to prove his point that he's well connected and part of this noble, grand set of people. But the cool part is that if you zoom in a little bit, you will see a couple of familiar names, such as Rosencrantz and Guildenstern. Yeah. Yeah. I will just say, I did not discover this aspect of Tycho Brahe. That would be a fabulous thing to take credit for. I first saw a book, I think from the 1930s, by some historian sort of noticing this and mentioning it, and then nobody talks about it again until the 1960s, and somebody mentions it, and then again it just kind of went away quietly, and then so, I rediscovered it circa 2012 or whatever, and don't forget. Let's keep it in the. Let's keep talking about this, because it's a shame that it just keeps getting forgotten. But I guess the question is, does it prove that Shakespeare got the idea for the names of these two characters? These are his old university buddies from Wittenberg that show up and add some comic relief and so on. And well, the answer is maybe, but it's plausible. Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are actually pretty common Danish names, and there were other people who had the same name that could have, et cetera, et cetera. But what I like to imagine that happened, so this engraving was, printed out, obviously, and then Tycho was putting it on he would send copies of his observations to different astronomers around Europe, and they would put this on top of it, as one might, just like a title page or whatever. And one of the people that it was sent to was Thomas Digges, England's top astronomer. And as I've mentioned, there were these connections between Shakespeare and the Digges family. So I like to imagine that, that Thomas Digges had a copy of this book. I mean, I think that he did, right? It's almost certain that he did. Thomas Digges dies sometime in the 1590s, but his widow, Anne, continues to live in that house with their son, or sons, I think there was more than one. And if Shakespeare popped over at some point, as he well might have, I think he could have seen this with his own eyes, and if he was trying to come up with some plausible Danish-sounding names, he's hit the gold mine here. And I will just remind you, I mean, I know many of you know the play Hamlet pretty well, but most of the names in Hamlet, like it's set in Denmark, the names aren't Danish. The Danes are all sort of vaguely classical Latin, Polonius, Ophelia. These are all names that just, you would pull them out of a random Latin-sounding name generator, right? But these two names really sound Danish, and indeed they are Danish. So, I don't, so
the dots are there to connect.
The dots are there if we wish to connect them in that fashion.
Let's talk about Galileo now.
Sure.
And the year 1564. Both Galileo and Shakespeare were born the same year. Yep. Do you think Shakespeare ever encountered Galileo's new telescopic discoveries?
Yeah. It's a great question, because I think part of the reason that Shakespeare scholars haven't really spent that much time wondering about Shakespeare and scientific discoveries, or if they did wonder about it, they wondered about it very briefly, came to the conclusion that Shakespeare either didn't know or just wasn't that interested, and then backed away from the subject. And that's partly because, all right, so Copernicus's book, as I mentioned, came out in the 1540s and gradually was making waves. But what really cemented this idea that the structure of the universe is different from what we thought is when Galileo in Padua, outside of Venice in Italy, aimed his telescope, a very recent Dutch invention, aimed it at the night sky, basically for the first time in late 1609 and into 1610. discovers, oh my goodness, it just boggles the mind, discovers that the planet Venus goes through phases like the moon does. This was unknown. If Venus was a little closer, you could see it with the naked eye, but it's just you actually cannot. But if it was a little closer, or if your eyes were, a bit better than a human eye, you could almost pull that off. Seeing that the Milky Way was a whole bunch of teeny little stars that are impossible to distinguish until you look at them with some kind of optical aid. Of course, the big one is that Jupiter has these 4 little companions that move around it, and today we call them the 4 Galilean satellites of Jupiter in honor of Galileo. He wanted to call them the Medici stars in honor of his patron, the Grand Duke of Tuscany from the Medici family. So all of these are just staggering discoveries. I feel like I've left one out because there's 5 of them. I don't know if I counted off 4 or 5, but at any rate, he discovers a whole bunch of things, publishes them in a delightful little book, and we just looked at a copy a few hours ago here in the library. That's in English, it's the Starry Messenger, or in Latin, Sidereus Nuncius. So it's published in March of 1610. So the thing with trying to position, where does Shakespeare fit into that? In the popular imagination, Shakespeare is like winding things down, right? At this point, Hamlet's behind him, King Lear is behind him, Macbeth is behind him, Othello is behind him. What's in front of him? The Tempest, which everybody knows and loves, and a couple of more obscure plays, The Winter's Tale and Cymbeline, which I may say something more about in a moment. But at just about this time, within a couple of years, he moves back to his hometown of Stratford, seemingly retires from being the world's greatest playwright to just hanging out at home or whatever, which is fine. And then he dies a couple of years later, because he dies at age 52. So it's easy to imagine that this happens too late, that something that happens in 1610 is just not happening early enough. But a few scholars, as I discovered as I started researching this in the 2010s, a few scholars have argued that there's a plausible connection between Galileo's discovery of the moons of Jupiter and the stuff that happens in Cymbeline. And when I talk about Cymbeline, so I don't have to ask who's seen Hamlet. You all have seen some form of Hamlet, whether it was Kenneth Branagh or what's his name, Lethal Weapon, the Mel Gibson Hamlet from 10 years prior. But you've all seen some version of Hamlet. Raise your hand if you've seen Cymbeline. A small number of hands. Okay, that's fine. This is kind of what I expected. And I hadn't seen it until I started researching the book. I was very lucky because I live not too far from Stratford, Ontario, where they do a world-famous Shakespeare festival, so I saw Cymbeline perform. It's not like they don't perform it every year. Like, if you just want to see Midsummer Night's Dream, it's everywhere. Just go to your local park and wait a while, and it'll be on. But Cymbeline is a much rarer, and I think I've only ever seen it twice. Yeah, I've seen it live twice, and of course there's the BBC production, which I think is the only video or film production of it in the At any rate, it's a very strange play. It's set in ancient Britain, but with a really complicated, because the book has been out for a few years, so in the hotel room I was rereading what I wrote. I give a little paragraph of the plot, a summary of Cymbeline. It's like, oh my God, I'd forgotten it was that complicated, but it's pretty involved. But one thing that happens, I think in Act 5, is that Jupiter, and I'm talking about the god Jupiter, makes an appearance. And the stage direction is Jupiter descends in thunder and lightning. I think that's the phrase. And this doesn't happen in Shakespeare's other plays, right? Shakespeare's other plays are about humans with occasional, fairies or magicians, that sort of thing. But gods don't appear until you get to, sort of 1610 and the play Cymbeline. And I guess having come this far, I'll just say what happens next, which is that the hero, the main character of the play, Posthumus Leonatus, is, the plot is so complicated. He's distraught because he feels he's been responsible for the death of his wife because his Italian friend Giacomo convinced him that his wife was unfaithful, which in fact she was not. It's just that Giacomo was hiding in her bedroom in a box. I don't know if that's the origin of Jack in the Box, but maybe it is. I should Google that. But Giacomo comes out of the box, makes detailed observations of this woman, you should not do that, and then convinces Posthumus Leonatus that his wife was unfaithful. So anyways, Posthumus Leonatus now wants to die, so what's a good way of doing that? Well, the most absurd way is the path he chooses, which is that so Britain is at war with Rome, so he dresses up as a Roman soldier waiting for his British friends to kill him. It doesn't work, he's thrown in prison, and as he's languishing in prison, he has this vision, and this is where Jupiter comes down, and then 4 ghosts move in a circle around Jupiter, and yeah, I mean, again, just like with the Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, shall we connect the dots? Shall we not? I don't know. It's cool. It's cool and had been largely overlooked for a long, long time until a very small number of scholars started publishing papers on it, like in the early 2000s. So
4 is pretty precise. It's not 3, it's not 5. It's 4.
Yeah. I mean, it seems like it requires some kind of explanation, right? It's such a strange play, you know?
And what year did Shakespeare write that?
About 1610.
Okay.
So you can just sort of imagine that he gets his paws on a copy of Siderius Nuncius in April or something, and the play is performed in June or July. I mean, it's possible.
Yeah.
It's possible. Yeah.
Sounds plausible, yeah. Let's go back to Julius Caesar briefly. The sky, there's a lot of celestial imagery. The sky becomes almost a character in the play.
Yeah.
How did people in Shakespeare's time understand celestial events?
Yeah, it's interesting, and the exhibit here has reinforced my understanding of this, which is very well laid out and explained. So we live in a world today where science, we teach science to school kids, and then in university you get even deeper into it. And, we live in this world where there's the stuff that you're studying, and there's you, and there's this kind of separation, right? So if you're a biologist or a chemist, you put the thing under the microscope and you study it. If you're an astronomer, the thing you're studying is out there, and you're here, and you're making sort of objective observations of the thing without manipulating or interfering with the thing. And I think the world in Shakespeare's time was just not like that at all. We were just part of the world. Astrology was huge. And so why was astrology huge? Well, because people people wanted explanations for stuff. It's like, why did this thing happen? Why was there that assassination? Or why were my crops not as good this year as they were last year? Why is my son or daughter or father or mother sick? Why are these things happening? And so astrology provides an explanation. Now, as I would, with my 21st century bias, I would say, but that's a pretty bad explanation. But nonetheless, if you were alive in that time, I think a lot of people would have very reasonably, they would have felt like it was a reasonable thing to do, to consult an astrologer and see what the planets are saying about your destiny. I mean, certainly in that time, nobody had a better way of the state of medicine was very primitive. I won't get into it now, but one of Shakespeare's daughters marries a medical doctor, and it's said to be a route that Shakespeare might have gotten hold of some of his medical knowledge. But like science, the way we think of it today, just didn't really exist. I mean, I think what makes the topic interesting and hopefully makes my book interesting, that we're just on the cusp of something like science coming into existence. But yeah, I think that what did people think of stars and planets? They thought of them as something that was quite significant to their lives. Mm-hmm. So stars and planets, eclipses, comets, the appearance of a comet. I mean, the funny thing is, like, if there's two nations and they both see the comet, they're probably both thinking it's a victory for them or something, which obviously is not going to be for at least one of them. But nonetheless.
But it had a meaning.
Absolutely had a meaning. Yeah, absolutely had a meaning. The world has changed so much, right? You can just Google the timing of the next eclipse down to the second, and even the fraction of a second if you know your precise geographical location. Of course, we now know perfectly well that it's the motion of the sun and the moon and all. We can just compute these things far in advance. But it was a different world back then, but a different world that was just on the cusp of evolving into the world that we're in now.
And you mentioned earlier that the medieval worldview, the stars were fixed crystalline spheres. But it was in Shakespeare's lifetime that that worldview was beginning to change. Now, turning to Hamlet.
Yeah.
Do you think there are scenes or parts of Hamlet that reflect this intellectual tension between the old and new worldviews?
I forgot who I was chatting with at the reception, but this sort of came up a little bit. Hamlet is so, oh yeah, it's because somebody had asked me about the recent movie Hamnet, based on the very popular book from a couple of years ago, and it's a good movie. There's so much in the play Hamlet. You know, if you are enthusiastic enough, and I guess people do this with the Bible too, but you can find whatever you're looking for, you could probably find it in Hamlet if you look hard enough. And as for, you know, the Copernican worldview, so let me just, I think it's the next slide, but I'm going to look at my little cheat note where I printed out on the, okay, I guess I can put the cheat sheet away. All right, in that case, right, yeah, I should have put this up 2 minutes ago. So, you know, one of Shakespeare's most beloved plays, as I was researching my book, I mean, you know, there's especially amongst scholars, there's a movement like, oh, King Lear is the greatest. They're both pretty great. I think King Lear has a higher death toll, has a bit more of a bloodbath, but the ending of Hamlet is pretty bloody also. At any rate, they're both good. Right, so there's this very interesting scene. I hope my head isn't blocking the view of the, anyway, but there's this very interesting scene right at the beginning, right? It's Act 1, Scene 1. So you're familiar with this. It's okay if you've forgotten the exact dialogue, because I've put it here for your pleasure tonight. So what's going on is that, so the prince isn't involved in the scene, so Prince Hamlet is not there. But the two guards, Bernardo and Marcellus, are talking to Horatio. Horatio is Hamlet's friend. And they're saying that, you know, over the last few nights, we've seen this ghostly figure, and gosh darn it, it looks like your late father, who died a while ago, you know, in his full armor and all that. And Horatio says, well, that's amazing, tell me more. So here Bernardo is trying to say what time it was. Apparently the ghost is on a kind of a schedule. So Bernardo says, well, last night of all, when yond same star that's westward from the pole has made his course to illume that part of heaven where it now burns, Marcellus and myself, the bell then beating one. He doesn't get to complete that thought because, speak of the devil, the ghostly figure appears right at that moment, and everybody sort of falls into a hushed silence. So the reason I've highlighted that bit there is because you might want to know what star westward of the pole are they talking about. And of course, you know, you're not obligated to wonder about that, because you could say, well, it's just a play, who cares? It's just Shakespeare's way of saying that a certain amount of time had passed or whatever. But if you go a little deeper into it, and I really had fun researching this, and I'll get to the punchline in a second here, but a few scholars, not many. So, you know, if you have the scholarly edition of the play, there'll be a lot of footnotes, right? Because every time, like in King Lear, where they're talking about coxcomb, and nobody in 2026 knows what a coxcomb is. So there's footnotes that explain what all these obscure terms are. So, you know, an edition of Hamlet like this might not say anything at all about that line. But if you get one of the thicker ones, there might be a footnote about this. And as I was researching the book, I went through all these footnotes trying to figure out what do people think. And they're different ideas. And in general, they don't work. I'll just say, so westward from the pole. So the pole, thanks to Julius Caesar, we know what we're talking about here. The pole means the pole star. Which way is north here? I'm a little disoriented from the... That way. Is that way north? Okay. Straight out the door is north?
Straight out the door.
Okay, great. So this kind of thing, I pride myself on knowing that, but since this is my first time to the library, so I don't... All right, so the pole star would be just about there. Of course, actually in Toronto it would be there, but here it would be, we're a little further south, so it would be there. So what's westward from the pole? I mean, westward from the pole means sort of over there. Actually, it's kind of funny, because the bright light lighting me up could actually be the one they're talking about. That's just a coincidence.
Maybe not.
Maybe not. Maybe not. Right. Connect the dots. So we're talking about some bright star in that part of the sky, not exactly above the western horizon, but not above the northern horizon either, but somewhere above the northwestern point of the sky. So as I was plowing through these footnotes, it says, oh, well, maybe it was a planet. Well, that doesn't work because planets, so those of you who remember your astronomy 101 will know this, a planet can only be on the ecliptic, which is this imaginary line that's sort of the plane of the Earth's orbit projected out into space. So it just doesn't get anywhere near the pole. And then I read other theories too that just aren't that great. And then I noticed, well, one particular article published in Sky and Telescope magazine, a really good magazine, but it's not a magazine for Shakespeare enthusiasts, it's a magazine for amateur astronomers. And there was an article about, by now it's probably about 20 years old, give or take, which should have gotten a lot more notice, but a few people noticed it, by a guy named Donald Olson. He's what they call a forensic astronomer. Like his specialty, he might be retired by now, but he's in a university in Texas, I forget which university. His specialty is like going through either old texts or old paintings, like the Van Gogh painting with the Big Dipper. Yeah, you've all seen that one. And just trying to figure out, or the Edvard Munch painting of the Scream, right? And there's something going on in the background that's kind of complicated, and trying to figure out what it is. So his specialty is like figuring those things out. So he published this article in Sky and Telescope saying that, okay, what was west of the pole in that time? Now, the constellations don't, I mean, whatever constellation was there would still be the same today. So it's Ursa Major, Cassiopeia, Draco, and a few other things. And in case anybody wants to fact check me, you actually don't need, you can download planetarium software or just find an online planetarium simulator thing. But if you don't like the internet, you can just get one of those planispheres for $10. You know what I'm talking about? It's a circular, yeah. These days they're made out of plastic, but they would have been cardboard in the old days. And you just turn the date on the outside to line up with the star map, and you can figure out where things were. So Donald Olson did that, and then thought about when this was happening. Well, I mean, the play is circa 1600. The setting is ambiguous because everything about the play feels medieval. That's the vibe. The vibe is medieval, but it's not because he went to Wittenberg, which didn't open until the 1500s. So it's a Renaissance play just with medieval elements. So who knows? But the point of this, the star westward from the pole, and some of you I'm sure have already figured this out, could be Tycho Brahe's supernova, which happened in the constellation Cassiopeia. This new star that burst into the sky in 1572. I play with this idea a little bit in the prologue to my book. If you're thinking, well, wait a minute, Shakespeare was only born in 1564, wasn't he just a little kid? Well, yes, he was a kid, but it's shone for many months. It's the kind of thing that could not have gone unnoticed and uncommented on. That just is unimaginable. And then it got written up too. So Holinshead, the historian or chronicler, wrote it up. So it's mentioned in Holinshead's Chronicles, which we know Shakespeare consulted because when you read Shakespeare's history plays, you can see where he cribbed or was inspired by the Chronicles. So Donald Olson, I mean, I'm not taking credit for this. Donald Olson in Sky and Telescope 20 years ago said, you know what? I think the star westward from the pole could very well have been Tycho Brahe's star, what we now call a supernova, but the Nova Stella, the new star of 1572. I think it's a pretty good idea. And one thing that really delighted me as I was researching the book is I found like one or two scholarly editions of the play that came out after that, so written in, say, the 2010s, I guess the 2010s, that acknowledge Donald Olson's theory and say, hey, this might have happened, which is great, because how often, you picture your average Shakespeare scholar at, Yale or Harvard or Oxford or Cambridge, analyzing the plays and thinking, oh yeah, I'm gonna give credit to this thing that was published in Sky and Telescope, but I'm sure that has only ever happened that one time. But more power to Donald Olson for figuring this out. And of course, other people could have figured, none of this was really a secret. You could have figured this out in 1900, but apparently nobody did, or if they did, it was forgotten. So again, plausible theory, right? Connect the dots if you feel like connecting the dots.
And
yeah.
Who knew there was a job as a forensic astronomer? So
I think Donald Olson is the only one.
Okay.
I think. Yeah. Yeah. But I'll tell you, I mean, I think I might have met him once at a conference. As I say, he's perhaps retired now, I don't know. But boy, his students have the life, because he would take his undergraduate students, like 8 or 10 of them, get in a plane, go to wherever. You know, if they're investigating Edvard Munch, they have to go to Oslo or where, I mean, somewhere out there. If they're doing Van Gogh, they have to go to the south of France. Like, that would be, I wish I got to do fun things like that as an undergraduate. But,
Sure.
Anyway, yeah.
I do want to leave some time for some audience questions, so let's look at King Lear.
Yes.
And astrology comes up in the play. Edmund seemingly mocks astrology. Is that?
That's a good way of putting it. So it's in the clip. So you'll see a video clip in just a second. And this one, where I didn't really set up the Julius Caesar one, but this one I can set up a bit. So you've many of you have seen King Lear in some form or another. All right, show of hands. Have you seen King Lear in some form? About 2/3, maybe 3/4, pretty good. Hamlet? Yeah, okay. So slightly higher percentage for Hamlet, but both very high. Right. So there's a long cast of characters. So in this scene that you're about to see, there's Gloucester. Who the heck is Gloucester? Gloucester is a nobleman who's a loyal, follower of the king, and he has 2 sons. His legitimate son Edgar and his illegitimate son, the bastard Edmund. And it's a really interesting scene. Yeah, that's probably enough of the setup. Well, I'll just show it. But at issue is why are all these weird things happening? And is it the fault of the celestial sphere?
These late eclipses in the sun and moon portend no good to us. Though the wisdom of nature can reason it thus and thus, yet nature finds itself scourged by the secret effects. Love cools, friendship falls off, brothers divide. In cities, mutinies, in countries, discord, in palaces, treason, and the bond cracked twixt son and father.
So I've just condensed it a bit because Gloucester goes on and on about blaming the heavens, and then it'll pick up here.
'Tis strange.
This is the excellent foppery of the world, that when we are sick in fortune, often the surfeits of our own behavior, we make guilty of our disasters the sun, the moon, and stars, as if we were villains on necessity, fools by heavenly compulsion, knaves, thieves, and treachers by spherical predominance, drunkards, liars, and adulterers by an enforced obedience of planetary influence, and all that we are evil in by a divine thrusting on. An admirable evasion of whoremaster man to lay his goatish disposition on the charge of a star. My father compounded with my mother under the dragon's tail, and my nativity was under Ursa Major, so that it follows I am rough and lecherous. I should have been that I am, had the maidenliest star in the firmament twinkled on my bastardizing. Edgar. Patty comes, like the catastrophe of the old comedy. My cue is villainous melancholy with a sigh like Tom of Bedlam. Oh, these eclipses do portend these divisions.
So, like I said, I've seen this clip a million times. I love it. I just love this. I think I like it more than I like the rest of the play. But it's so well acted. I mean, obviously Edmund is brilliant, and the way it's staged is great too. Because Edgar comes in and it just stands there. It's like, oh, my brother's saying something to the audience. I better just wait a minute. But it's so perfect. And then, so where does that leave us? Like, Shakespeare, I mean, Shakespeare doesn't have to see eye to eye with the characters that he's created, but it's impossible for the characters to know something that Shakespeare didn't know. So it seems as though, well, look, who do you love in this? I mean, Edmund is a villain, but you like him. You kind of like him. he's smart, he's scheming, he's got things figured out so much more than his father does. He's more with it. We don't really hear much about Edgar because Edgar doesn't actually get to speak in the scene. But we're sort of kind of on, it's a villain you love to hate. Some of you can remember J.R. Ewing from Dallas, or Tony Soprano. I actually never got into The Sopranos, but at any rate, you know what I'm talking about here. They're the bad guys that you love to hate, or love to love while other, I don't know, whatever. But you know what I mean. So this speech really casts doubt on astrology, and I guess tells us that Shakespeare, even though it was a world infused with astrology, everybody was thinking about astrological stuff, as you will see in the exhibition there, but some people were thinking, yeah, you know what, maybe stuff just happens, and maybe we can't blame, and there are other passages, the one about the Falk, Dear Brutus from Julius Caesar, and there are others too. There's a long-winded thing in Henry IV, Part 1, which you can find in my book. So this kind of stuff comes up a lot. And in terms of, where does Shakespeare sit in this? I guess I would just say it kind of looks like, I mean, you don't want to overdo it. You don't want to say, here Shakespeare is presaging, well, for the older folks, Carl Sagan, for the younger folks, Neil deGrasse Tyson, but you don't want to paint Shakespeare into the, which he's not, obviously. But it seems like he's willing to step back and say all this stuff about the planets and the stars influencing this and when you were born and blah, 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 and who's going to win the next battle, that maybe stuff is just happening, and those are explanations that we make up. So I forget exactly what the question was, but I think hopefully
that was the question. Yes, that was the question. I think it's a great time. You ready for some audience questions?
I am ready for audience questions.
I think we can. Yeah. Christina will come by with the microphone.
Okay, everyone brace your eyes. The lights are going to come back on. Raise your hand if you have a question so those watching on our live stream can hear as well. I'll come around. Any questions? Let's go.
Don't be shy.
Have you seen an increase in sales since the movie Hamlet came out?
Sorry, it took me a second to see where you were. An increase, well, I should click on Amazon, so I don't know. I mean, that would be delightful if that was the case. I don't know. The book has been, I'm not saying you shouldn't buy a copy, you should, but the book has been out for a few years. I'm not expecting there to be like some major boost. I was delighted that Eric and the other Eric were conscious of the book, because you always fear as an author that your book has been forgotten after a few years go by. So yes, I'm afraid I just don't know if there was a spike in sales, but that would be great. And I enjoyed the movie. Some minor issues with it, and the critics have said very interesting things about it. I didn't read the book, so I only know the book via the movie. But I certainly did hear the author interviewed on NPR and a bunch of other places. So at the very least, it's interesting. And for those who don't, basically the key events are all real. Shakespeare had 3 children, a twin boy and girl, of whom the boy died young, and and the two daughters lived on. One of them married a doctor, as I mentioned earlier. I forget which one, but So anyway, it would be great if it caused a little bump in sales. I would be in favor of that.
All right, all the way back past the Taza.
Hi.
Oh, yep.
I had a question kind of about the authorship question about Shakespeare. So a candidate like Edward de Vere would have had education in some of these spheres of science. Is that something your book deals with at all?
Well, I do have a couple of paragraphs on that. You won't like them. With apologies to anyone who's a big Oxfordian in that sense of the word, because Edward de Vere was the Earl of Oxford, I think it's most likely that Shakespeare was Shakespeare, the actor who moved to London and he had a good grammar school education and so on. But I appreciate the urge to analyze this, because it is fascinating. We don't have as much. We don't have as much information about Shakespeare's personal life as we would like, right, by a long shot. Now, it turns out, according to the scholars, who are basically all of the opinion that Shakespeare was Shakespeare, but there absolutely were people over the course of history, and very smart people, who questioned that for sure. Well, I forgot where I was going with that, but yeah, it's natural. We wish we had more information, like letters that he wrote instead of none whatsoever, or signatures on documents other than legal documents. Right? There's about 5 or 6 documents that are authentically, identified as being signed by Shakespeare, and he spells his name differently each time. And so, there are a lot of. It's easy to be an anti-Stratfordian, as the Shakespeare doubters are called in the biz, because they will say things like, "Well, I enjoy Shakespeare's plays, but in my imagination they were written by someone who could write." And this bumbling fool from the provinces, from the counties, could barely write his own name. So I get where this comes from, but I've read a lot about, the way I see it is, it's not really. The only reasonable way to approach something like this is to talk to the people who have spent their careers studying Shakespeare and Shakespeare's works. Greenblatt and John Pitcher and the others, and just see what they say. And they're of the opinion, first of all, they will tell you that there actually is about as much, for someone who is not a king or a queen or a prince, there actually is about as much information as you would expect there to be. So there's the published works, which thank goodness, those have survived. And then there's a few legal documents, and that's roughly what you would expect for someone born in the countryside and who moved to London, had a career, and then moved back to the countryside at the end of his career to retire. It's roughly what you'd expect. We have more about people like Marlowe and Johnson just because they had different types of lives, or Donne for that matter, or Milton. Shakespeare was, from the countryside, and I don't know. I don't think being from the countryside prohibited from becoming Shakespeare. I think he just absorbed, the traveling plays that went around. Was very literate. Almost certainly had, once in London, made friends with people who had returned from Italy or from Germany or wherever to get all these ideas from. Someone who could read Montaigne and read Plutarch and just read all these things and absorb them. So anyway, so yes, I do mention the authorship thing briefly, but in the end, boring as it may be, I come out on the side of Shakespeare most likely having been Shakespeare.
Right over here in the middle section.
First of all, thank you very much for this interesting talk. And I'm not sure this is going to land very well with this demographic, but I was talking to my Swiftie niece,
All right.
who informed me that Taylor Swift's new album is a reference to Shakespeare's character Ophelia, and the front cover is Taylor Swift in a bathtub and surrounded by flowers, and I think that's how Ophelia dies, is picking flowers in a brook.
Yeah.
So does Taylor Swift owe the Shakespeare some residuals?
Great. No, this is great. I think so. Thank you for pointing that out. I forget if I heard it somewhere and then forgot, or maybe I saw it in a record store and then forgot. But this is delightful. And so what does it tell us? I think it shows that Shakespeare has this staying power for whatever reason. I mean, it helps that he's taught in school a lot, but people, and even people who don't, I don't know how far into Shakespeare Taylor Swift has gotten. Maybe she's read all the plays, maybe she's only read 1 or 2 of them. I have no idea, but nonetheless, Shakespeare feels like he's in the room with us, right? I mean, it feels like what he gave us just made, to some extent, the world that we're now living in, and and he wasn't a scientist. He was, as I say in the book, he wasn't a psychologist, but by golly, he understood human nature. He understood what it meant to be a human being and to have human problems, and some of them are more relatable than others. Not everyone goes about trying to avenge the murder of their king by their father by their uncle, but a lot of the other things are things that in fact do happen to all of us, and that's cool. I'd forgotten, or perhaps didn't know the Taylor Swift thing. I will make a point of going to have a look at the album more closely, and it's clever. It'd be interesting. Like I probably on Wikipedia I can read whose idea? I mean, was it her own original idea, or did she talk about it with people? But anyway, it sounds great. I'm in favor of Shakespeare allusions on pop album covers.
All right, so we are past the hour, so let's make this virtual question our last. Our president, Dr. Eric Dorfman, is in the chat, and he asks,
Oh, great.
You've talked about Shakespeare's influences. How influential would his plays have been in disseminating these ideas as they were being performed at the time?
Ooh, yeah, good question. Difficult question. Right, so there's so much in Shakespeare's plays, and of course he would have drawn big audiences to, oh, it's just, I forget where I read this, because I think it's, yeah, no, I guess it actually is in my book somewhere, but a passage that I'd forgotten that I wrote until I reread it in the hotel room. But the acting company, Shakespeare wasn't necessarily directly involved, but the acting company consulted with astrologers as to what date to open the globe on. So that gives you an idea of how pervasive astrological thinking was. But in terms of, disseminating ideas, well, it's tricky. I mean, Shakespeare gave so much through his dramatic works, and audiences would take away so much. But again, I don't want to fall into the trap of, because if you go to a talk by Neil deGrasse Tyson, as I've done when he was in Toronto, he's absolutely disseminating information, right? He's making knowledge about the solar system and the Milky Way galaxy and cosmology sort of friendly and easy to digest, and then you go home having absorbed some degree of that knowledge. So I don't think going to a Shakespeare play is quite like that, but it's not entirely unlike that. I mean, you do come away with something. If you go to see Coriolanus, you come away knowing something about the Roman Empire, right? If you see Cymbeline, I don't know what you come away with. It's like, don't spy on your friend's wife while she's asleep. I don't know. But you certainly come away with something. And yeah, I mean, ideas. I hope Eric Dorfman doesn't think I'm weaseling out of trying to answer his question, but it's a good question. It's a difficult question. Yeah, Shakespeare gave a lot of people a lot of things, but not exactly in a textbook way, more like in a let's go to the theater and then just kind of think about humanity sort of way.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Dan, for the amazing conversation.
Thank you. Thank you all.
And thank you all for joining us tonight. For all of our upcoming programs and events, please visit lindahall.org. We'll see you again. Have a good night.